So today we are going to have a look on the DPDP Act. Okay, so what is DPDP? Okay, DPDP is the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023. So how far it impacts the stakeholders? So this is a session we are going to see for the coming 1 hour. Okay, so what is the agenda actually? So we'll have a brief introduction about this act and the applicability of this act and who are all, I mean, who has to play a role and what are their obligations and a few FAQs under this act. Okay, and finally we have a question and answer session wherein you can post the questions either in the chat box or if we want to speak, we can unmute and speak and we can discuss the queries which you raise. Okay, so we'll go for the introduction, like what it is exactly. See, the digital protection the Digital Data Protection Act. Okay, why we need to understand this act? Why we have to give much more importance to this act? Okay, right now, because this act was enacted in the year 2023, and the rules was notified last year. I think November it was notified, and the implementation phase, the full enforcement comes, it takes few more years to for the full enforcement of this act. Okay, so in that case, why we need to understand right away. Okay, so to make ourselves ready with the compliance and to stay ahead, so it is, I mean, the relativity thought there. I mean, we have a vision that the companies can have a futuristic approach to stay ahead and comply fully with the act, and they themselves can gear up for any changes happens. Okay, so that's why we give much more importance right away, so that the establishments, they can gear up themselves for the change. Okay, so as you all know, like right now, the government is digitalizing every functionaries. Okay, so you can see that almost all the complaints under the various act, it is happening digitally. Okay, so with the recent labor reforms, okay, so you have a fair idea, like almost all the activities, right from applying for any license or registrations or for even for maintenance of any records, you can do it digitally without any manual intervention. Okay, so the government is giving much more importance towards digitalizing of almost the compliance part, I would say. Okay, digitally. And moreover, when you look into the business perspective, the business are expanding in a very rapid phase manner. Okay, so almost all the business, they have their own what do you say that platform to sell their services or products. Okay, so it gives an instant delivery to the customers or clients. Okay, so all this happens with the app, the website. Okay, so when you download an app, you can avail n number of services at your doorsteps. Okay, so the delivery also happens with the blink of eye. Okay, people sitting at a remote place, they simply click and then they can order the goods or the services which is being delivered instantly. Okay, and as I told you, all the registrations and licenses is being, you can obtain via a digital platform. So how this happens means whoever wants the license or the permissions, they have to submit few documents through online, and you have to pay the fees whatever that is applicable. So once you go for the submission, you will receive the digital certificates and the licenses and the registrations. Okay, so you don't, there is no manual intervention, everything happens through online, through a digital platform, wherein the whoever wants to avail these registrations or the licenses, they have to submit the relevant personal details online and they can avail this instantly. Okay, so going for the banking sector. Okay, so nowadays opening a bank account is very easy. Okay, so people, they visit your home, they fill the forms, they just scan the personal documents, they send it through WhatsApp. Okay, you don't even have to go to the bank physically, and then you have to what do you say that fill the forms manually on your own. Okay, everything happens digitally with a simple what do you say that scanning the documents, sending it to the relevant people, and opening the bank account within few days time. Okay, it's not that easy, what do you say, tough to open a bank account. So all this is because, like, you're sharing all the personal details via app or through a digital platform. Same goes for the insurance also. You don't have to fill the forms manually. You can avail the insurance through online, just with sending a WhatsApp message. You can avail the insurance for it may be either vehicle insurance or medical insurance, whatever it may be. Even for renewal also, you don't have to go and submit the details for renewal. Okay, simply you can send their valid driving license and your Aadhaar card details. You can share it to the agent through WhatsApp, and you will receive the renewed insurance very quickly. Okay, so all this happens at your doorstep instantly, very rapidly, very speed in a speed manner. Okay, so you don't have to wait for so long for your goods or services that has to be delivered at your home. Okay, so a tough business competition happens wherein people with a rapid speed or with a very quick manner, they will deliver their product or services to the customer or the clients. Okay, so the customer becomes the king right now. Okay, so all these happens digital through digital platforms by the customer. But when the customer seeks any services or products, means they have to submit few documents, personal details, and then in return they will get the services very in a fast paced manner. Okay, so all these happens, as I told you, with the sharing of personal data of the individual on a daily basis. There are n number of business entities who are involved in this. What do you say, that the business or the services. So what they do is they collect, they store, and they process the personal data of the customers to provide them the appropriate services at the right time. Okay, so this happens, this processing of the data. We have a number of business entities who are located in overseas. Okay, so they collect, like for example, I could say, if you Amazon or a few other e-commerce business, they collect the information, they cater the services instantly to the customers. Okay, so this processing of the personal data, it can happen either inside the India or it can happen overseas. Okay, so as I told you, there is a huge transaction of personal data or personal details of the individuals. Okay, so what happens is there is no control measures to check, the monitor, and what happens to the personal data of the individuals. Okay, sometimes it may personal details may land up with the fraudsters. Okay, so that may be an individual, I mean, threat to the individual's privacy also. So we have come across so many such fraudsters, wherein we may likely to lose the bank, I mean, the amount from our bank. Okay, so to prevent all these fraudulent activities and to protect the individual's right towards individual's privacy, the government has launched this act, what we call as the Digital Data Protection Act. Okay, so you may ask, there is already one IT Act. Okay, the IT Act is something which, what do you say, that it is for the establishment wherein they have to follow some protocols to protect their data. Okay, this is more of a personal data protection. Okay, so it ensures the individual's right to protect their data, personal data, like they should understand who is handling their personal data. So when you look into this act, this compliance provisions, it's more focused on the e-commerce business and banking sectors and financial sectors and the insurance and social media platforms and online gamings also. So why this focus? I mean, they have the, I mean, what do you say, the clients, they share their personal details, especially in the key e-commerce platforms and the banking sectors, to open a bank account, to handle their account. And for finance and insurance sectors also, they will just, as I told you, with the click of a button, you can do whatever client they wish to have their services. Okay, so in that case, as a establishment, as a e-commerce business entity, they have to follow some procedure. Okay, so to handle these all these personal data. So this act, what it says is like, when no individuals, without any individuals concerned, nobody can either collect, they can store or process the personal data. Means without an individual's consent, nobody should collect their personal details. They cannot store and they cannot process the personal data. So unless they give the consent, no business entity can collect the details. Okay, so what the rules and the act, they provide a clear cut guidelines how once a business entity receives the personal data, how they have to handle this personal data that has been provided in a clear guidance is given in the rules. So they have to follow those guidelines to process the data. So once the data is received, they are being held accountable to legally comply with the provisions of the Act. Okay, so if suppose in case if any breach of what do you say the data happens, they are accountable for that. Okay, they are responsible for that. Okay, the organization, they have to have a separate individual who will be assigned with the role that they should be fully accountable to handle the personal data. So they can appoint a data protection officer to ensure that they are legally complying with the provisions of the Act. Okay. So as I told you, this Act and rules will be fully enforced in the year 2027 in the month of May. Okay. So till now, a portion of the Act is being implemented or enforced. Okay. So right now, they are in the process of forming the Data Protection Board. Okay. And the data fiduciaries, what do you mean by data fiduciaries? Okay, the data fiduciaries is nothing but the establishment or the business entities who receive the personal data of the clients and they handle it. Okay, so this, why we are discussing this, what do you say, that the act right now is it will ensure that the data fiduciaries are very well prepared to handle this compliance in the few years period. Okay. So at the end of this session, the key takeaways from this session would be for the HR department to understand what are the policies they have to frame, or if you have policies currently, how they have to tune the current existing policies as per the legal requirement. Okay, so this session will help them to understand that what kind of changes they have to make. Okay. And moreover, once they have framed the policies as per the legal requirement, it is necessary that they have to provide training to the relevant stakeholders. Okay, so for example, employees, we have contractors, we have vendors, we have retainers, okay, in the organizational setup. So it will equip the organization by providing all these training to the relevant stakeholders. It will give the establishment to prepare themselves to comply the act in a full-fledged manner, and it also reduces any financial risk. Suppose in case of any minor negligence, it will protect. Okay, so it won't land up any with the huge penalties. Okay, so that is why we are focusing right away this what is DPDP Act. So to get know more about that, so that we can start what do you say that fine tuning or procedures or the policies, and we will be ready with in few years period of time. Okay, so when we see the applicability of the act is applicable to all the entities, okay, irrespective of the nature of the business or the size or the volume of the business that is being handled. It is applicable for all the MSMEs and even the startups also. The act is very much applicable. So hope you have an idea like what the act, what is I mean, what is the aim or what is the preamble of the act? Okay, so now we'll just dive in deep into what is the legal, what do you say, the provisions of this act, so that the appropriate data fiduciaries and the data processor, they will enable to understand what they have, what role they have to play with. Okay, so here the act, as I told you, the preamble of the act is to process the digital personal data with a lawful purpose. Okay, so that way it protects the individual's right to privacy. Okay, so it follows a very simple approach. With the language will be very simple and understandable, and the information should be very clear. Okay, and it is easily accessible for the data principles and data fiduciary. See, I'm keep on repeating the word data principles. So data principles is nothing but the one who possesses the individuals whose personal data, that individual is being called as a data principles. Okay, and the law provides a very rational, means it gives a very logical reasoning for what purpose this personal data has to be processed, and actionable in the sense once the data is being processed, how it has to be utilized and how long it can be stored. Okay, so this is the thorough approach of this act. And coming to the applicability, okay, there are two different scenarios wherein the act remains applicable. Okay, so whenever a personal data in the digital form is being processed within India, okay, the act is very much applicable. Suppose in case if you are providing a hard copy of your personal data and that is being subsequently digitalized and that is being subjected for process, means the act is very much applicable. Okay, and it is also applicable outside India if the personal data of the individuals who are located inside India and they get in return they get the products or services. Okay, so it may be processed outside the India, but the data principles are located within India, means they avail the service or the products in India. Okay, so that is how the act remains applicable. When this act is not applicable, okay, so when the personal data is processed by the individuals for the personal or for domestic purpose, okay, so when they process the data for any domestic purpose, where the act remains not applicable. Okay, and in some cases what happens is the individuals they themselves voluntarily provide the data in a public platform, or for example job portals. Okay, so if the individual seeks any employment opportunity, means they themselves will provide all the personal details in the job portal, wherein the employer will have access and they can download and their resumes and they can shortlist and select the right candidates. So if they have voluntarily provided, this act is not applicable. Okay, and if there is any obligation towards any under law, means the act is also not applicable. For example, if we provide PAN card details, okay, in the online ITR filings, as per the act, we have to provide that. Okay, so in that case, you don't have to take the consent of the person to process the data. Okay, so we need to understand few key terms to understand each rule or the obligations of the each rule. Okay. So data fiduciary. So data fiduciary is an entity which decides why and how the personal data is has to be processed. Okay. So they are the business entities. They will decide why this personal data of the individual is required and how they are going to process the personal data and what is the intention of processing the personal data. All these things they have this data fiduciary they will decide. Okay, either they can do on their own, they can or they can outsource that activity to some entities. Okay, so these are called as data fiduciaries, means they are fully accountable for. Okay, and data principal, as I told you, the individual to whom the personal data relates. Okay, so they are called as a data principal. In case if the individual is a child, means the parent or the legal guardian, they are being defined as a data principal. Okay, and in some cases, if the person is a physically challenged person, if they cannot do it on their own, they can have a legal guardian who they can act on their behalf. Okay, so these are all the people they are being called as a data principal. One is the individual the personal data relates to, and if it is a child, it's a parent or the legal guardian. And if the person is a legally challenged who they cannot act on their own, the legal guardian is called as a data principal. Okay, and the data processor is any entity which processes the personal data on behalf of the data fiduciary. They are called as a data processors. And concern manager. Okay, so this is a concern manager. Again, this is an entity wherein they have a prescribed qualification. If they fulfill the prescribed qualification, they have to get themselves registered with the board. What board? The data protection board. Okay, so they have to get themselves registered with the data protection board, and this is a platform wherein it brings a transparency, and it is an interoperable platform wherein the data principal they can submit their concern. Okay, they can give their concern, they can review the concern, and if at all if they want to withdraw the concern, they can withdraw the concern through this consent manager. Okay, so right now what I can give example is we have a DigiLocker. Okay, so if we want to avail any what do you say, certificates, renewal, or whatever, maybe in case if we have to submit any personal details like your driving license or Aadhaar card, you can store that your personal details in the DigiLocker. Okay, you can give the consent to the particular business entity to have the I mean to get the details from the DigiLocker. Okay, there are few other entities who are getting registered as a consent manager. Okay, so hopefully we may be getting to know in coming years. and the Data Protection Board. So again, this is a government independent body which regulates the compliance under this act. Okay, so if anyone raises any grievance, also if they have any inquiries, they will do as because of the breach of data breach means they have to ensure that this is being resolved and the appropriate corrective measures are being taken, and they will ensure that the individual's right to privacy is being protected as per the act. Okay, so this is the role of the Data Protection Board. So we'll go to the core principles of the act. Okay, so this act functions on 7 different core principles. Okay, so the first and foremost is the consent and transparency. Okay, so as a data fiduciary, if I want a personal data from any individual, means I have to take the consent from the individual. Okay, so I have to clearly mention for what reason this personal data is being procured. It should be in a very clear and simple understanding language without using any ambiguous words. Okay, so it should be very clear. And after the individual gives the consent, they can go for the what do you say that obtain the personal data of the particular individuals. So the essence of it is without an individual's consent, we cannot obtain or process the personal data. Okay, and for what reason this personal data is being obtained from the individual, that has to be very clear. Okay, and the purpose limitation. So once you receive the personal data, for what purpose you have received, it has to be restricted to that purpose alone. Okay, it should not go beyond that limit. Okay, and data minimization. So whatever the minimal amount of personal data is required, that alone has to be received from the individual. Okay, for example, for to prove that IW, you don't have to go for the work visa and all. So simple a passport alone is sufficient. Okay, don't go for what do you say that a maximum amount of personal details. Instead, the data fiduciary has to go in and collect a minimal data required to fulfill that specified process purpose. Okay, and once the data is being received, the data fiduciary has to ensure that the data is very much accurate, complete, and it is updated as on date. So once he ensures that the data that has been received, he can take it for the processing. So once the data is being processed, there is I mean, the data fiduciary cannot store this for a longer indefinite period of time. Okay, there is a specified time limit till the data serves its purpose. They can retain the data. So once that has been done with, it has to be, it should not be retained by the data fiduciary. Okay, so when it is under the control of the data fiduciary, he has to take all the appropriate measures to safeguard the data. There should not be any data breach. Okay. So whatever the measures is required, security measures, he has to ensure that all the guidelines that has been followed and there is no unethical hacking or data breach from the data fiduciary. Okay, so once the data is received, the data fiduciary is fully accountable for the data. Okay, if anything happens to the data, he is fully accountable for that. So what happens is he can, what do you say, appoint a data protection officer who, in turn, he has to ensure that all the legal requirements is being completely followed while handling this personal data. So the Act functions in based on these 7 core principles. Okay, so it has given some details about what is the role of the data fiduciary. So data fiduciary, he can process the data on the mentioned 2 grounds. Okay, so he can process the individual's data for which the individual has given the consent. Okay, so based on the consent only, he can process the individual's data. And other one is for legitimate purpose. Okay, the law has given a legitimate purpose wherein they don't have to obtain a consent, they can process the data without the consent. Okay, so that is called as a legitimate uses. Okay, so when you say lawful purpose, means it is not forbidden by any law. Okay. Okay. So notice to obtain consent. So if the data fiduciary wants personal details from the data principal, they have to send a request. Okay, they have to request the data principal that for what purpose the data is being sought for. Okay, so along with that request, they have to send a notice. Okay, the notice has to have some prescribed details. Okay, so it has to have an itemized description of the personal data which is required from the data principal. Okay, they have to describe what all the details which is required. For example, name, date of birth. You have to explain those details. Okay, in a very clear language. Okay, and along with that, they have to mention that what is the rights of the data principal. Okay, so they have to describe the rights of the data principal as per the act. Okay, and suppose in case if they have any query or if they have any grievance, to whom they have to raise the grievance, their contact details, everything, the mail ID, the phone number, everything has to be provided in the notice. Okay. So what is the legitimate use of the personal data? I would say as an organization, they have to, if the data principal they have provided voluntarily with saying that I don't have consent, they can use the data without any consent. Okay, the data fiduciary can use the data legitimately. So from the organizational perspective, how this act how it remains applicable for an organization. Okay, so excluding, I mean, I wouldn't say excluding. So in the organizational setup, okay, who are all being what do you say that defined as a data principal? One is employee, contractor, vendor, the retainer, or you can say a freelancer, and the customer or the clients. So these are all data principles. So why? Because we are receiving some personal details from the employee. We receive the personal details from the contractor. When you sign an agreement, we receive some personal details. As a retainer, we receive the personal details, and from the customer also, we may likely to receive the personal details of the customers. So they remain as a data principal in an establishment setup. So what is the legitimate use of the personal data? Okay, so as I told you, the principal, the employer, they can use a personal data for the purpose of employment. Okay, the act empowers the employer to make use of the personal data for the employment purpose alone. And in some cases, when you hire an employee and you are assigning a very key position wherein that individual will be handling the trade or business information or the trade secrets. So to protect the business from the business interest point of view, they can use the personal data so that their trade secrets or their if they have any intellectual property rights means they can use the personal data of that particular individual who is accountable for all these what is it the business information. So what they can do is, like for example, they can use your personal data for background verification. Okay, so once they do that background verification, it is not necessary that you have to share that details to the individual. Okay, so this is a legitimate use of the personal data from the organization perspective. Okay. So once you receive the personal data, you have the data processor within your organization, or you can outsource that activity that the data processor can do on behalf of the data fiduciary. So in that case, you have to have a good agreement, okay, with all the safety clauses. Oh, so what is the HR role in an organization? So as I told you, we are receiving a multiple personal details from the multiple sources. Okay, as a HR, they collect and maintain and store the data for a longer duration of period. Okay, see for example, when you say the personal details of the employee means the name, address, the date of birth, the previous employment history, their pay structures, and their performance evaluations and their biometric attendance details. Okay, in some cases you may have to maintain even the medical records of the an employee. Okay, so pre-employment they subject the employee for what do you say that medical examination. So in that case you have to maintain the medical records also. And so from the contractor perspective, while signing the contract, you may collect the data details of the personal details of the contractor. Okay. And in some cases, you may have to likely to receive the contract labor details also. So in that case, you have to receive, maintain, and store the data. Okay. And retain is freelancers. Okay. Before engaging any freelancers, obviously you may sign an agreement and you may have to get few details from the freelancers also. So from the financial information aspect, you have to maintain the payroll details and benefits given to the any employee. Okay, it can be a monetary benefits and non-monetary benefits, but whatever the benefits which you are giving to the employee, that remains as a personal details of the employee. Okay, and few other details which is are required as a regulatory requirement. For example, if you collect Aadhaar card and PAN card details from the employees, that all as per the regulatory requirement, you may have to collect all those details. So excuse me, twice I have repeated this retain as personal data. Okay. So coming to obligations of data fiduciary, the act gives some obligations from the data fiduciary. Okay? So once the data fiduciary has the personal data details, he has to take a very reasonable security safeguard measures. Okay, so while securing the data itself, they can follow some what do you say, the data encryption mode or obfuscation mode. Means like you can mask the data of the individuals. Okay, or you can use the virtual tokens method wherein it maps to the personal data of the data principal. Okay, this is one measure. Okay, another one is they should have a strict access control. Okay, so nobody can easily access the system of data fiduciary or the data process. So they have to ensure that they follow access control measures so that the data is being protected from any unauthorized access. So what they have to do is they can have a maintenance log. Okay? Whoever is being authorized to log into the personal details, they can maintain a log. Okay, so this will help to understand who is logging into the personal details of the data principals. It helps to understand that any unauthorized individual is accessing the personal details of the data principles. So if at all, if any unauthorized access happens, means they have to take appropriate measures. They have to investigate why this happened, how this happened, and appropriately they have to take the measures to prevent it, so that it doesn't happens in future. Okay, so this is one of the obligation of the data fiduciary. Okay, so once the data is being retained, they have to ensure that there is a data integrity is there, and that it helps to continue continuous processing of the data. Okay, for example, if you want to calculate the number of years of service for a gratuity, means the data should be available for the payroll team to process. Okay, there should not be any data breach, or there should mean the data should not be lost. Okay, so they have to take appropriate measures to back up the data so that it is normally we come across organizations, no, they will miss out the any acquisitions or mergers that happens, they miss out the actual data of hiring data. Okay, so in that case we may not be able to what do you say, that recollect all those details. So in that case it is the obligations of the data fiduciary to have a complete backup of the data. And once the data is available, it is the retention, the act specifies the retention period. Okay, so it says that you can retain a maximum of 1 year period. So here what we can observe is there is a gray area wherein if you could recollect the labor codes, recent labor codes, wherein they have mentioned that the act mentions that at least a 3 years period, I'm saying the least number of year, okay, at least 3 years period or to a maximum of 5 years period, the employer can retain the records of the individual. But in this DPDP Act, it says that the retention period is 1 year. Okay, so this is somewhat a gray area. Maybe once the act is become enforced in full-fledged manner, we may get to know, have more clarity on that. Okay. So, as a data fiduciary, they have to take appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure that the security of the data is being maintained. In that sense, they can have a frequent audit, like how the measures they follow is exactly how it protects the data or not. Or they can have a frequent audit. Either they can do themselves or they can engage a third party to do the audit. And if at all, if they are outsourcing any activity, means the data fiduciary should sign an agreement with the data processor wherein all the safety security clauses being adhered to. Okay, so that is one crucial obligations of the data fiduciary. Okay, So if at all any data breach has happened, okay, if any an unethical hacking has happened, or if any somebody has unknown person has hacked the data of the individuals, means what the data fiduciary has to do. Okay, the first and foremost thing what he has to do is like he has to intimate to the data principals, those people, those data principals who have been affected with as because of this data hacking or the data breach. They have to intimate to the data principals immediately. Okay, and they also have to inform the government bodies, that is the data protection board, within a specified time limit, that is 72 hours of the incident has happened. Okay, so while giving this intimation, they have to give the details of, like they have to describe how this what kind of data breach has happened at what time and how this has happened. They have to describe all those details. Okay, if that unethical access has happened, means what would be the consequences of this, and what is the measures, the safety measures to mitigate that risk. Okay, that has to be described in detail. And in some cases, if this is a threat to the individual's privacy, means they have to explain the safety measures that data principals has to follow. Okay, they have to give the details. And suppose in case if they have any query or grievances, the whom they have to approach, okay, that address details or the email address details and the phone number details have to be provided in the intimation. Okay. Okay, so coming to the rights of data principal. So the act is empowering the data principal, so they have every right to give the consent or to refuse the consent. It is not making mandatory that you have to give the consent if any data fiduciary is requesting. Okay, it is up to the data principal either to give the consent or to refuse the consent. Okay, and they have every right to know that how their data is being processed. Okay, and they should have access to their personal data, and they can also correct and update the personal data if it is required. Okay, and in some cases if they feel that they want to erase the personal data, they can go for erasing the personal data too. Okay, and then an act also empowers them to nominate any person on their behalf. Suppose in case of their death, okay, who can act on their behalf, they can do nomination of their other person also. Okay, and in some cases if they have any grievances, they have raised the grievance to the data fiduciary and to the data board. In that case, that grievances has to be resolved within a period of 90 days period. Okay, either the response has to go within 90 days period, and it has to be resolved within the specified time limit. Okay, so we have seen the gist, or we had a glimpse of the Digital Protection Data Protection Act. Okay, so how this act is being implemented, the government has gone for a phased implementation. Okay, so this matrix will help you to understand how this act is being enforced. I hope the screen is visible. I think is Excel sheet is visible. Can anyone can reply? Fine. Okay. So this is the matrix wherein you can see that how the government is structurally they are enforcing this act. Okay. See, as on date, if you could see this, right from November 2025, they have gone in for certain amendments. They, until November, last November, they can do any amendments. Okay. Until this November 2026, if how the children's data has to be processed, okay, they can do that. Okay, so the full enforcement of the applicability of the act will come in the month of May 2027. Okay. So till such time period, we have to look in for any changes happening, and we have to be ready ourselves for implementing this act. Okay. So we have come to almost the end of the session. So few FAQs. Okay. So when is data processing exempted under this act? Okay. So the rights of the data principal shall not be applicable in the following instances. Okay, so if it is for enforcing any legal right or the claim, it is not, the act is not applicable. Okay, if it is required for any court or tribunal, means the act is also not applicable. It is to prevent or detect or investigate for or for prosecute any individuals for any offense, means the act is not applicable. Okay. And if they are not Indians, if the personal data of the non-Indian or the data principals pursuant with if they sign any contract with any non-Indians, means the act is not applicable. Moreover, if it is not based in India, maybe outside India, if it happens, it is not applicable. So what are the different categories of the personal data? Okay, so the name, age, date of birth, Aadhaar card, PAN card details, the financial data like the bank account details, the transaction history, the medical data of the individuals, the biometric data, the employment and the educational qualifications, and even the family member details is also classified as a personal data of the data principal. So legitimate uses where consent is not required. Okay, so these are all the legitimate uses wherein the data fiduciary doesn't require the consent of the data principals. One is, as I told you, voluntary disclosure by the data principal. It is not required. And second is the employer, to protect the business interest, they can make use of the personal data against any the trade secret, data breach of the trade secrets or the intellectual property rights. Okay. And in case of any medical emergency, they don't have to take the consent of the individual. Okay. And at the time of any disaster, okay, for providing any benefits to that individual, it is not required to have the consent of the individual to provide the service. Okay. So the act also prescribe the penalties. Okay. If you fail to comply with the specific provisions of the act has clearly given the penalties. One is breach in observing the obligation of a data fiduciary to take a reasonable security safeguards to prevent personal data breach. Okay. So if the data fiduciary fails to protect the personal data, or if there is a personal data breach, means the entity is responsible for penalty of 250 crores. Okay. And breach in observing the obligation to give the board or affected data principal notice of personal data breach. Okay. In case if there is any data breach and the data fiduciary has failed to give the notification to the or to fail intimate the data protection board and the individual, means they are liable for 200 crores of penalty. Okay. And breach in observation of additional obligations in relation to children. So if they fail to follow the obligations, means like 200 crores is the penalty. Okay. So breach in observation of additional obligations of significant data fiduciary. So what is significant data fiduciary? Data fiduciary, they are into, like, for example, as I told you, e-commerce platforms, they are the banking sectors, they are being called as a significant data fiduciary, that wherein their role, their responsibility towards compliance under this act is more. Okay. You see, if they fail to comply with any of the obligations, means they are liable for a penalty of 150 crores. Okay. And breach of any terms of the voluntary undertaking made by a person and accepted by the board. Okay, the board has being empowered to take some legal measures. Okay, whatever the measures they take, they whoever the affected party, they have to comply with that. If they fail to do that appropriate, they have, the board has got the that power to penalize the individual. Okay. Breach of any other provisions of the DPDP Act or the rules made thereunder. Okay, so if we, as a data fiduciary, they fail to comply even any of the obligations or any of the guidelines in handling the personal data, they are liable for a penalty of 50 crores. Okay, and even the Act penalizes the data principals. How they penalize the data principals? If they provide a false information of their personal data, or if there is any forgery of the data, they are liable for a penalty of 10,000 rupees. Okay. So this is we had a glimpse of the Digital Data Protection Act. Okay. So we have concluded, we have come to the end of this session. So now you can post your queries. So before that queries, I would like to highlight what all the services Relativity offers. We do payroll processing, payroll compliance, tax compliance, and local labor law compliance also. And we have a HRMS tool and compliance tool, HR consultations we do, and we do also audit. And we do POSH compliance also, S&D Act compliance. And recently the labor reforms on the codes, we do wage code consultation. and we do HR consultation, and we play as an advisory role also. And we do Apprenticeship Act complaints also, wherein the responsibility as an employer, what we have to do through online platform. And we do CLRA compliance and do audit. And we advise for salary restructuring also. And we do advisory for DPDP. Okay. So I would request all the participants to share the feedback. So Divya, can we?
Yes, ma'am, it's
Okay.
launched.
Can we wait for a few seconds? Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So I shall end the poll here. Fine. So you can connect us through LinkedIn and through YouTube also. We are sharing few articles through blog. You can connect with us. Okay. So coming to question and answers. Okay. So either you can unmute and you can ask your questions, or you can post your questions in the chat box. So if you have any questions, you can post in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and you can raise the questions. Okay, Divya, they are saying that they are not allowed to unmute. Okay, can you please post your questions for whatever the questions you have, you can post.
Thank you. I think I have got the access. Now I can unmute myself and talk. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just have a very small question you might have already covered. I might have missed it. So
So
when
can I know your name? Is it? I think you are Shivi Saxena, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah. Hi, Shivi Saxena. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So whenever we are collecting these data, which you have mentioned, the personal data from the employees at the time of joining, right? So
Mm.
at that time, we are required to get a consent field from them, or we have to do it in case if we are using it somewhere.
See, you have to use it for legitimate purpose. Okay, the act provides for legitimate purpose. That is for one is for the employment. Okay, so other
Hmm.
than that, if you are using it, for example, you may have a vendor for car lease. Okay, in that case, you may have to share the personal details of that particular individual. In that case, you have to obtain the consent. It is advisable to take the consent of the individual.
Okay. Okay. So at the time of joining, if we are collecting any data from them, we don't require to have any consent or notice.
Yes, exactly. Because the act gives empowerment. Okay, the clearly states that for employment purpose they can take use of the personal data. Okay, so
Okay.
please is it for employment purpose. Whereas car lease, it is not a mandatory employment requirement, right? You are
Hmm.
giving a benefit to the individual. When you take an insurance from outside third party vendor, you are going to share few details about the employees, like their date of birth, their family details, all these things you will be sharing it. In that case, you have to take the consent of the individual that is required.
Okay. So actually, like we have insurance in the company and we are asking employee to log in themselves on the app and sending their details. So is it okay because they themselves are uploading their details over there? And so
See,
I
as I told you, who is receiving the personal data? Who is receiving the personal data? They are the data fiduciary. Okay, if someone is asking for your personal details, they become the data fiduciary. They are accountable for it. They have to ensure that they take the consent of the particular individual and they process the data. Without the consent, as simple as that, without the consent of the individual, please don't go for processing the personal data.
Okay. Not even for the insurance which we are providing them as benefit.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Got it. Got your point. Yeah, that's it. I think I
Yeah.
have this
Yeah.
one.
Hope this gives a clarity. Yeah. Thank you, Shivi.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? If you have, please post your questions, or you can unmute yourself and you can raise your questions. Shall we wait or shall we end the session, please, Divya?
Yes.
Fine.
We
Okay.
can close the session, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you for participating in this session. Hope this gives a fair idea about what is DPDP Act. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you.